Today's super exciting. Today we have some Felder goodies coming in.
And then the rest of the week, it goes up to about 50, then 60, maybe 70s. We don't know.
So apologize for the lighting, but it was incredibly cloudy, but incredibly bright. So the camera was kind of blown out here. It was about 30 degrees, very windy. It was brutally cold for down here in Houston. You can hear the wind flapping right there. But that's our two new Felder machines. And here we'll kind of show what all entailed the actual delivery of those machines. We had been waiting for 8 months, give or take, for these to come in. It is a massive joiner planer and a saw shaper. You can see on the left there, that long piece is the sliding rail gantry that goes to the slider. So this first piece we're loading up is the actual joiner planer, clocking in at about 1,400 pounds, so definitely not a light piece of kit whatsoever. What's funny is I had never done anything like this before, and eventually I just let the logistics guys do their thing, because they drove that pallet jack super well. I was just kind of the awkward customer supervisor. I would say 95% useless at this point. Now this one was the saw shaper. Fully assembled, this clocks in at like, I want to say 2,100 pounds, but was also quite a bit wider than the joiner planer. So after a good half day of getting the things into the garage, we started the disassembly of the crates. I will say Felder did a really good job at protecting these machines. They were pretty much immaculate. And in fact, the pallets were actually kind of a pain to take apart, if I'm being completely honest. But everything made it here safe all the way from Austria, so really can't complain besides the extra labor it took to liberate these things. Yeah, we eventually got into a groove and just kind of passed bits back and forth to work on different things, and taking the plastic down, taking the wood studs down. And actually I noticed something interesting about the crates. It looks like they actually dimension their lumber on their machines, I guess maybe to calibrate them. But all of these 2x4s, besides being completely filled with screws and bolts and all that good stuff, were actually way better than anything you would get at a home center. Like, these things were straight and true and had nice edges on them. When we were taking apart, I was like, man, the big box stores have nothing on these guys. Now besides the 2x4s, these actually had some kind of cool brackets that locked them down to these massive pallets so that they were secure in place. And if you were to ever move these machines again and want to put them back on pallets, you can just put the brackets back on and screw them down, and they'll stay put. So you kind of want to put them in a safe place. See, we were all trying to figure out this one bracket. It was in a very strange spot, so it wasn't easy to get to, so we kind of had to fudge things a little bit. So here is the saw shaper fully assembled and ready to take its first cuts. I didn't film any of the assembly because it took so long to have enough time to put everything together, so I did it in 30-minute chunks over 2 weeks. I will say the machine is a dream to use. Required almost no calibration whatsoever. Just a couple little turns of, I think, 2 bolts, and it was bang on 90 with the gantry, which is amazing compared to the Makita we upgraded from. Not knocking Makita, but this saw versus a contractor saw is completely different ball game. You see the sliding gantry lets you actually just ease into your cuts. Your hands are very safe away from the blade. You've got that hood over top to catch any of the dust coming off the top of the blade, and it also has collection down at the bottom, so it sucks up most of the dust. You can see on the back of the table itself, it kind of spritzes out some dust just when you actually go through the back, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that, so you're always going to deal with a little bit. Whereas contractor saws, you can put a vacuum on them, but pretty much they're just going to cover you. Now the great thing about this saw too is how easy it is to get repeatable cuts. So that fence acts like a stop when you're using it with the slider, and all you do is you put your wood in, you can true up the edge, which is what we're doing right here, just to get a nice flat edge off of that, what comes out of the factory. Once you pull back, then you can slide it all the way over, hit that fence to whatever your setting is, and then you can make your cuts. So one of the great things about the saw too is it makes it real easy to get rid of knots. So you just put the knot on the right side of your blade, wherever that would be, run it through, back off, then you can start immediately proceeding with your cuts for the pieces you want to use. Absolutely brilliant piece of kit. So here is the jointer portion of the joiner planer. And the first couple times it took me a little bit to get this thing to where I could even make a pass. You see I kind of get stuck there. So I guess this may have happened in shipping or just wasn't quite properly set up. But the way a joiner works is the front bed, the one you start on, should be lower than the apex of the blade, and then the back bed should be a little bit lower than the apex of the blade, or completely even pretty much. And what that'll do is, as you're shaving it, the back end plate or table will support what you're cutting off, or will support the wood as you're cutting off that sliver to flatten it. The problem with this was that table was too high, so it keeps catching. And after a few kind of frustrated passes, I kind of had to try and finagle that back bed to where it was in the correct position. And you'll see after I get a few passes on this maple here that I've dialed it in pretty close to where it needs to be. It still needs a little bit of adjustment, but it's much better than when I first started. So first one snagged just a hair. And that one snagged just a hair as well. But you'll see as the passes go, it's actually not too bad. See, and that one's just like butter. And the cool thing is I check for flatness here, and there's actually some suction because it's so flat. If you've ever tried to pull two perfectly flat surfaces apart, there's that suction. That's what happened on that board. I feel like with a slight bit more tweaking, this will be running beautifully. So all those pieces that my wife cut out, those 16-inch strips, I'm flattening them now and about to plane them so we can cut them into smaller strips for glue up to make into cutting boards. So this is a joiner and planer. It's a combo machine, so it actually uses the same cutter head in a different configuration to not only flatten a face of the wood, but to also make it uniform thickness. So that's what running it through the bottom will do. That plate right there that I'm raising up is perfectly flat as well. So I put my jointed face down onto it, and it will shave the top off and make them perfectly parallel. That'll make the glue up much easier because your pieces of wood, when they're parallel, they won't be skewed in any particular orientation, leading to like a cup, a bow, or just some sort of weird anomaly in whatever you're making. So set the fence for the thickness of the strips that we're going to make. Truing up one of the edges here, just shaving that little bit off. Just slide it till it hits the fence, and then proceed to cut your strip. Just like that. So a bunch of those strips, glue them together, you got your cutting board. So I didn't film the glue up. It's essentially just gluing and clamping. But here is actually putting the edge profile on these cutting boards that we made. This one in particular is hard maple and padauk. And we're just putting a gentle chamfer on it. Now this one is maple and walnut. Walnut being one of my favorites. It looks fantastic, especially when oiled. Then a good old surfacing with the sander, roughing up rounding off the edges a little bit so it's nice and soft to the touch. And everybody's favorite part, the actual finishing. So we let these soak until they're good and saturated. And then we just buff them with wax.